Hey, welcome, Jack Theology. Matt here with Kevin again.
Good to see you, man. Here we go again.
Looking, looking. You and I are wearing two different attire today.
You're in
Uh,
the north. I'm in the south. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. It's been consistently below 70 here, so it's optional sweatshirt weather,
Yeah,
which I
fall has
like.
set in. Sweatshirt weather is great. Cut off the sleeves off of that, sweatshirt, and there you go. Welcome
That's a good
fall.
idea. That's a good idea. That's a good idea. Um, yeah. So thought we'd get in today. We missed last week. I was away at a retreat, which was enjoyable. Did a silent retreat, which I try to do once a year. And it just happened to fall last week. So I was silent for about a week. Actually, I was there 7 days and then got home and got sick. And I couldn't speak on Tuesday uh, very well. So I was intentionally silent and then my body just silenced me. So
Well, I'm glad you seem to be doing better.
yeah, getting a little better. Um, So yeah, today I thought we'd talk about. There's a lot that we could talk about, and we'll probably address some of the stuff going on in our cultures like we normally do. But there's been a lot of talk, and when I run around in pastor world. I know you do as well. Still, and there's a lot of talk about like where does a church go from here? I mean, we've addressed all of the stuff of deconstruction a lot, and we've talked a lot about too like individual reconstruction. But I think the churches around us are deconstructing or losing members, whatever, fill in the blank. And so, what does a church of the future look like? What does a church need to do to head into the future? Is kind of what we want to look at today. And it's a big question, but I think we should just give some thoughts on that. See where the Lord takes us.
It's a big question. It's a big
Um,
problem. I think, as you said, tying it together to, kind of institutional deconstruction, kind of mirroring personal deconstruction is a thought I've not had before, but that makes a lot of sense to me that we see the church in a lot of ways breaking apart. Even if you disagree maybe with the idea or the concept of deconstruction, I think that probably everybody can agree that the church here in US America is broken. Now, we all may disagree on which churches are broken and what is broken in the church, but I think that everybody kind of has this sense of things are not what they should be here. Yeah, I like that idea of deconstructing and reconstructing this idea of an institutional or I guess a unified body or people rather than just as an individual.
yeah, I think. I mean, as we look around, I think people are deconstructing left and right. Um, how they're reconstructing is looks very different. I think even our friends over at New Christendom, and I say friends loosely,
Our
but
Christian nationalists, it's up to God whether they're brothers or not. That's not my call. That was above my pay grade.
but they would tend to agree with us on this that the church is compressing, and obviously they have a way of addressing it. They think that we should just become a Christian
Yeah,
nationalist
Christian nation,
nation,
right?
and
Yeah,
then
make
it'll fix it
everybody
all.
make
But
everybody operate in that paradigm, right? Everybody live
yeah,
Christian, even if you're not following Christ. That's better. What's wrong with that?
yeah. So I read, which if you're interested in deconstruction stuff and you haven't read Brad Jerzak's The Great Deconstruction, it's a great book. And one of the things in there that struck me, and I reread the chapter again, was kind of this idea. And he talks about Nietzsche. I think that's how you say it, Friedrich Nietzsche, or however you say it, the German philosopher who said God was dead. Kind of gave a projection over 200 years philosophically what was going to happen, and we're kind of following it to a T. And one of the things he said, and I think we're kind of here now. He used the word nihilism, that the church and or the people would fall into nihilism, like doesn't matter, it's nothing. And that's kind of another name for kind of deconstructing. And people don't want to stay there long, right? Like, you don't want to stay, humans don't want to stay in this like nothing matters kind of mode.
You can't, right?
We're
It's
gonna
disastrous and
no,
eventually to
yeah,
your soul, to your psyche.
yeah, yeah. So, which is why I think we're seeing, and he was right. All of these things spout up, like why Trump, I think, it has a lot of success with people, because it's like, well, I got to grab onto something, right? And so Nietzsche argues that people will come quickly out of nihilism and they'll grab onto these emotive movements that will, in their mind, create utopia. And so people have to reconstruct to something. They're not going to stay in that deconstruction mode forever. And it could be atheism, right? It could be just rejecting the faith, but they're going to attach themselves to something, or it could be the political party of Trump, MAGA. I think philosophically that's why they're having a lot of success. New Christendom has their way, and I think it's important though that we kind of dialogue around this, that there's other options for people of what kind of a new way of looking at church could be, because people are looking for it. And so, yeah, kind of frames the conversation a bit and kind of where we're at culturally. I think it's so true. So, um, it's interesting too, as I was thinking about this, trying to come up with a topic today, um, and right, well, last week, I think it was last week, in Seoul, Korea, there was the Luzon conference that Billy Graham started, eons ago now, and kind of this idea. It's very evangelical, gathering the world church together to
Like old school
unify.
evangelical, though, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
like
very old
gathering
school.
people together is no longer kind of what the word evangelical means, but it's like historic evangelicalism, if we could say that. I mean, evangelicalism is not that old, but it
Yeah,
is like that conference and what it stood for. And Billy Graham, kind of what his original thinking was a very big tent kind of mentality. And yeah, so in that way, it is very evangelical in a way that it's not so much. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, the
Rabbit
old way
trail.
of looking at
Woo!
evangelical. Yeah, no, you're totally right. Um, and then the Catholic, the Pope is having what he calls a synod of synods to come together as bishops in the world church to
Yeah.
find unity. And
Which
these two
happens a
things are
lot.
happening side by side, which is
I,
fascinating to me.
Protestants see
Go ahead.
Catholicism as being, well, Protestants see Catholicism as kind of being its own thing and being very anti-Protestantism, and I'm sure many are, but the Catholic Church has oftentimes, over the last few decades or over the centuries, offered many opportunities, for there to be common ground, for there to be unity, to come together in these types of synods and kind of large church, summit type things to find things that we do agree on within the body of Christ, which I think is really just kind of incredible and helpful, because in a lot of ways I don't see as much of that in Protestantism. Now, certain segments of Protestantism we see that, but by and large, I think that model is a great model that we should be participating in order to find the ground that we do have in common with each other, rather than just simply always focusing on the things that we don't have in common with each other. I think part of the deconstruction, part of the fracturing, part of the reason why some of these, what I would call false god religions, such as New Christendom, politics, GOP, alt right, the unholy marriage of empire and faith. I think so often so many of these things have sprung up because, as you said, people are looking for something in order to believe in, to offset that nihilism. And the church really needs to come together, I think, and reconstruct something that's more beautiful and more unifying, more foundational, so that all of these splinter cell groups that are false religions and false gods aren't overtaking people. If any of that made sense, hopefully some of it did.
Yeah, no, I think that's where I was headed with it. So you summarized that well. I think you made a great point about it. I think, yeah, I I think you're exactly right. I think it's a sign that I think the two largest kind of Christian movements in the world, evangelical and Catholic, see see what we're talking about here. That we got to figure something out as we head into the future. And I
Catholicism's
love the
experiencing the same thing, though, too. I mean, Catholicism
yeah
is experiencing the same thing that Protestantism is, this kind of growth in the ground roots of what I would call a toxic cancer of false theology that's tied more to politics and empire and nation and selfishness, the person rather than the community. So, they're facing a lot of the same thing, in large part now, in strong reaction to the current Pope, to Pope Benedict. In many ways, just as Trump has been a lightning rod for evangelicalism, Pope Benedict has been. Wait, Benedict? No, that's not the current Pope. Pope Francis.
Francis. Yeah.
Pope Francis has been a bit of a lightning rod in the opposite direction for the Catholic Church, and so. Yeah,
Yeah,
Catholicism is seeing a lot of the same things that Protestantism is, and so maybe they're having the same conversations about Reconstruction and unifying that we are. I don't know, but
well, I think, yeah. I mean, I haven't dove deep into either of these. It's been a surface cursory look, but the Pope has been more open-handed on investigating things like gay marriage. Do we allow gay marriage in the church in the future? How do we welcome, even those with different tribal backgrounds? Like, he's invited Protestant groups into the conversation as well, which is very kind of historically anti-Catholic. So he's putting everything on the table. What does the church look like in the future? Whereas I think, the evangelicals are definitely the more conservative one in all of this, as you pointed out. And it's, how do we reach the world for the evangelical gospel? And very much surface level look. It was very colonial in nature. And I'd be interested to hear from some of my friends who study the colonialism more, what their thoughts are on that. But my initial look, it just seemed like more of the same.
yeah,
Even though they had diverse panels, it just felt like kind of the same stuff evangelicalism's been pushing for the last 100 years, which has gotten us to where we're at today, which I don't think is very helpful. So I guess that leads to kind of my first thing is, and I'm at least glad both groups are asking the question, is what does a church look like into the future? And then how do we move into that? And I think that's what you have to do. I think that's what churches, if we take it down to the local pastor level, like, how do we ask that question locally? Like, what is our church going to look like into the future? And I think it's going to have to be different into the future. I've been starting to have those conversations, with my folks here as well. Like it's got to be different. We can't keep doing the same things. So I think at least asking the question is where you start.
yeah. I'm sure you have some thoughts here. The first thing that came into my mind is contextualizing the church into the local community, whatever it is. And I know that a lot of Protestant, a lot of evangelical congregations talk about being a part of their community and being invested in their community, but they're really not. The stance of most evangelical churches and most Protestant churches, primarily because of the theology, is a standoffishness against the community, a standoffishness against culture. And so the primary kind of foundational thinking in which we view the lens of the communities in which we're placed is standoffish, that we are against the world, that we're against the culture, that we're against society. And I just think that, first of all, that doesn't match up to what I read in scripture. That doesn't match up to how we see Jesus practicing. Jesus was standoffish and antagonistic against the religious people, not against the communities in which he ministered to. It was quite the opposite in that. And so what does it mean to be a part of your community? And I'm not just, talking about, funding the local, pro-life care clinic. I'm not just talking about, doing a hell house. I'm not just talking about planning satellite churches. I'm not just talking about working in food kitchens. I'm not saying any of those things are necessarily bad, but what does it mean to really be an advocate on behalf of the greatest needs in your community, and solving these problems, getting involved in people's lives, doing the work in which nobody else is doing, especially in the areas in which nobody else in the Christian world is getting involved in abortion care, in racism, areas, speaking up against supremacy, doing the hard work, and advocating for trans individuals, for LGBTQ people. I mean, whenever you talk about Catholicism, one of the things I was thinking about Pope Francis is Pope Francis has done an incredible job of not necessarily changing the theology, but changing the way in which the Catholic Church interacts with individuals theologically. And so Pope Francis has not said, that on behalf of God, you are now like acceptable living in a gay lifestyle. But there's nobody out there, I think, who is in the LGBTQ community who would say that Pope Francis isn't their friend, who would not say that Pope Francis is not advocating and working on their behalf in some way. So I understand that there's this tension there, but unfortunately what the church does is the church has tended to focus on the tension rather than focusing on the individual, and just shutting their mouths, frankly, about the theology and letting it all work out. And we don't want the theology necessarily to change so quickly. I understand that, these are human rights issues and all of these things, but one of the beautiful things about the Catholic Church is that it doesn't turn on a dime theologically. But with love, Pope Francis is showing us that even though our theology may not immediately change, it takes a long time to work through some of these things. We can interact with our communities, we can interact with individuals differently. And I think the Protestant church, the evangelical church, has a lot to learn about being contextual and non-antagonistic against the communities that they're in, and really advocating on behalf of the marginalized, the oppressed, and the poor. And that doesn't just mean throwing money at it. That means like getting physically, personally involved.
That's so good. I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about, since I guess I would still consider myself part of the evangelical landscape. It's hard to take all the layers of that onion off. But one of the things I've noticed as I've kind of been more of an outsider lately, is evangelicals don't really know what their community really thinks of them. And I think,
oh my gosh, if they only knew, if we only knew, right?
Yeah. I think that's part of it. Like what you're saying is so true. It's contextualize, but to contextualize, you probably first need to go listen and figure out what they actually think about you. Because it's going to be very different than what you think. Very different. I mean, yeah, like
if you're able to find a way to hear what people are actually saying, it's going to be brutal.
Yeah, it's brutal. Like before people knew like my background religiously, in each gym I've been a part of, it's been fascinating to learn what they think of what they call born agains. And it's not very like pleasant experience. And they're spot on. And so to think that your cute little event, your cute little worship service is contextualizing the gospel into these people's lives who are literally making fun of you, is so false. In fact, the other day in a friend group text, and they knew I was part of this, they posted that this local church was writing letters to neighbors, inviting them to a free Bible study, and she was saying to make sure to throw that nonsense away, right? Like, and I'm sure that it was a Baptist preacher. I know who he is. Spent a lot of time strategizing all this, and they may very well get a few people to show up, but by and large, the community is laughing at your letter and throwing it in the garbage. That's what they're doing, and it's actually not helpful at all. I can tell you my experience as a Christian wanting to see people come into the church doors, it did not help me at all. So, just getting to know what they're actually thinking and saying would go a long way for you. They think, by and large, pastors are pedophiles and sex abusers. They think churches are corrupt and greedy. They think what you believe is nonsense. That's what you're starting with. I mean, it probably could go on. So,
well, yeah,
you've got to learn.
The church is an asshole to people who aren't a part of the church. I mean, we are seen as being the folks, who are committing pedophile as clergy. We're seen as being the folks you're right, who are taking away their human rights. We're the people who are out there speaking most passionately against rights for people. It's the church right now that's trying to take away the 19th Amendment, a woman's right to vote. It's people in the church right now who are trying to return us back to 1960s or pre-antebellum United States we before we had, segregation, or before we had freedom and free rights. It's the church who's trying to take away people's ability to get Medicare and Medicaid. It's the church who's trying to take away people's ability to get free lunch for their kids in school. It's the church who's speaking out against all of these things and working towards all of these things and voting in people who are doing all of these things. Why would we think that the world wants anything to do with us or has anything positive to say about us? We cannot override all of the idiots who are in public office and who are in view, who are leveraging God and leveraging Jesus and leveraging the Bible in order to get themselves voted into something. We can't override all those things. The only thing that you can do that is to, in your context, in your local place, change people's opinion of you, change people's opinion of your church by giving them a different narrative in your place and in your location. But to the world who isn't a follower of Jesus, followers of Jesus are doing everything they can to harm the oppressed, the marginalized, the needs. We're seen as being locusts who come into communities, who utilize all of the resources, who pound our chest saying, we're the best, we're the greatest, come be a part of us. We don't pay taxes on any of our property or everything. We are as completely distanced and uninvolved in our communities. We're takers, not givers. And we have the ability to write that narrative, but we have to work really, really hard to do it. And like you said, most churches, most Christians aren't able to listen enough to hear that what they tell about themselves, the story they write about themselves, is not the true story.
So good. Yeah, the meanest people I ever see online are Christians. The fact, this gentleman just got killed in Missouri for, it seemed like he was innocent, at least worthy of staying the execution and investigating a little bit further. And yet, Christian governor, supposed Christian Supreme Court, ruled against it, that he should die. And then, all these people are posting online, Christians, that he deserved to die. And it was so sad to watch. And then you think that's helping the broader community, find Jesus, who we pitch as the God of love, that he loves you and he died for you. And so these things don't line up for people when they hear you spew that stuff and then say this about Jesus. And it's sad. And people aren't going to step in. So yeah, contextualizing the gospel starts with knowing, how to even present it. Even if you believe in like all of that nonsense of the death penalty, posturing yourself properly to the community, it's got to be the. Are you muted? I can't hear you.
Sorry. Where's the value? Where I'm just talking.
I thought it was me. I was like, wait.
Where's the value? Where's the value of going out into the public forum and celebrating the death of an individual, no matter how warranted it is? As a Christian, where's the benefit in doing that and celebrating death rather than celebrating life? But we're so confused about what our call is and what our mission is here, that we think that it's better to celebrate and to enforce a death penalty rather than grieve over loss. I mean, you can start there, grieving over loss, even if he deserved it. If he didn't deserve it, which we know conclusively that a number, not just one, but a large percentage of people who go through and capital punishment end up being found out to be innocent. I don't know how Christians can even live with themselves, frankly, knowing that even one or two people end up being put to death for something that they did not do, how do we ever justify putting anybody to death for that? I don't know. I know this isn't about capital punishment, but again, it's about
Well, yeah,
understanding
the
how,
hypocrisy.
yeah, the hypocrisy, how we are viewed, and how we don't have we're not self-aware. We're not self-aware as to how we come across, how our theologies come across, how our behavior comes across, and how we are ending up actually doing more harm than good in the world in which we've been placed.
Yeah. So yeah, contextualize, and then what you're contextualizing is how to love your neighbor. Really, to me, it goes back to love God, love your neighbor. That to me, that's the church of the future. So how are we gonna how are we gonna love God as a community together, and how are we gonna love our neighbor? And so,
Rules and
um,
truth are love, though, right? I mean,
what?
I mean, rules and truth are love. I mean,
Oh,
people hear
yeah.
that and they're like, "Oh, I'm loving them by telling them the truth. I'm loving them by giving them rules and boundaries," but they don't receive it that way. Even if that's true, let's say it's true, which I don't think it is, but let's say it's true. They don't receive it in that way. It's not felt as being love. And so, what are you doing? You're pushing people further away from God by doing that, by giving them something that, even though it may be love, is not felt or communicated as love. I just
Yeah,
there's no
but
self awareness.
that's not how it works, though. Like, my kids don't listen to me because I give them a bunch of rules. Right? That works for a little while, but especially, and you know this, you have teenagers. Like when
I
they're
do.
toddlers, when they're toddlers, like you can give
You can do
them the
that.
rules to
Yeah, right?
follow, and then when they become teenagers, you can't just give them rules anymore. They're just
They're
gonna
doing
look
what
at
you
you and
want.
like,
Just, yeah, exactly.
no, no. The
Who do
way I
you
get my
think you are?
teenagers, yeah, exactly. The way I get my teenagers to do what I ask them to do is I have to first posture myself as a loving father who cares about them, and the approach is so different, and I have so much more success with my teenagers by posturing a certain way rather than just giving them a set of rules to follow. And I think it's the same, the whole speaking truth and love. Yes, there probably are some true things that people need to hear, but speak them in love. Like, you just yelling from the mountaintops, you're going to hell if you don't follow this rule, is not speaking in love. I'm sorry. um, it's not loving. So yeah, learning that is important, and,
Well,
and sometimes you just don't even
yeah, I mean,
you don't even need to speak
we
the
don't even know how
truth.
to love people. I mean,
Yeah,
this is where we need to begin. We don't even know how to love people who are different, who think differently, who act differently, who behave differently. We don't even know how to love our neighbor. With let's just set aside all the theology. I think you made a great. We don't even know how to love, and that's the starting place. We've got to figure out how to love people, just period, and then we can maybe begin to have a conversation about how do we love people into our theological constructs.
yeah, yeah. I
That's
mean,
what I want to do if we're talking about reconstructing church. I want to reconstruct a church that actually knows what the hell it means to love. There.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I think that's where it starts. Like, um, yeah, it starts with essentially showing people who God is. And that's showing them Jesus through love, and that's what's relevant for people. When you truly live Jesus in front of people, all the stuff they make fun of you for, they're going to respect you. They're going to listen to you. Now you have a chance, an opportunity to speak because they'll listen to you because they know you care about them and love them. And yeah, and if we don't start there, it's just going to fall on its head. So we got to start there. Um, I think too we have to kill some dead elephants in the church. I had this image this past week as I was in my prayer time, and I was on a hike in the woods, and I tend to be somebody who like sees like a dead tree. So like in an ecosystem of the forest, I see like a dead tree, and I just want to rip it out, right? And take it out and plant a new tree there. Um, but I was struck that uh, in the ecosystem there, like the dead trees, is we let them lie in there, and then the other trees grow around them. And it struck me that like I probably should do more of that. Just let dead trees die. No need to rip them out, but plant new trees around them. Right?
I mean,
Plant new life around
the
them.
richest soil is where the dead tree is.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Right. Yeah,
if
there's a
we're
lot.
talking science, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's a great
yeah,
analogy, man. The richest so that's why other trees grow around it. It's because the richest soil is there. It's
yeah.
teeming with nutrients. There's some great metaphors here. I love this.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I hadn't thought of it, but it's true. Like how many trees grow out of a dead stump? That happens all the time.
I mean,
Um,
every Christmas, what we celebrate that out of the root or out of the stump of Jesse, shall grow, this David, this new line, out of this tree
yeah,
has been felled, out of that stump, out of that death will arise this new Messiah, this new kingdom, this new line. Um, that's an amazing parallel. I had never thought about that though, kind of in relation to church and ministry. Fascinating. I like that. You should write that out.
yeah. I have it. It's formulating. I have notes.
It's in the
But
pressure
yeah,
cooker. I like it.
yeah. But yeah, the but I was
But
struck
let it
like
die, right? I mean, let it
let
die.
it die.
Let it
Just let
die.
it die.
I agree. Just let it die. Let things die. I was having a conversation online, this week about euthanasia. Oh, because President Carter, they showed
Oh yeah, yeah. I saw that.
this video of him on his 100th birthday, and they roll him out, and it's difficult, right? It's difficult to watch him there in that shape, and a lot of folks, you can feel the reaction in the comments and people that it's not right, it's wrong of them to put him out there, and I'm not, whatever. That's a decision for he and his family and those things as to whether or not they show him that way. But the uncomfortableness, this idea that we have this uncomfortable relationship with death and dying. I think that you're right that death is not necessarily a bad thing, and sometimes things just need to be allowed to die. Should not be kept on life support forever. Churches should be allowed sometimes to die. Put them on hospice, do it gracefully, but let new things rise up in their place rather than trying to keep things on life support that are giving no life really anymore or are taking
Yeah.
life. Anyway, go ahead.
No, yeah.
I
I mean,
don't know where
listen.
you're going with that before I just kind of
No, no, that's so true. Like,
bandwagoned it, somewhere else.
well, what we tend to do in church with ministries, at least in a church. So if you're leading a church like I am, and you are online, you see ministries that aren't working, and at least my instinct is just to try to figure out how to shut them down. And I think probably rather start something new in its place and just let the thing die a natural death. Um, and there's probably things all over the place that need to die in your church that just maybe worked in the 70s and 80s, and the church has just held on, right, for whatever reason. And I can think of 5 in my brain right now if I said them out loud.
There'd be a riot in your church.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not going to
Exactly.
kill the quilting ministry. No. I don't know if you have a quilting ministry or not, but I've been in a church that has, and so all right.
We have a craft group. Yeah. So anyways, that was what I was thinking. Like, just let the new life sprout up. It doesn't even necessarily have to mean, but we do that. Like, we take Jimmy Carter of a ministry and we try to spruce him up. Even like the family did. They put a hat and this, they try to make him look better than he probably was. And so we tend to do that. And yeah, we don't want to look at death. We don't want to embrace death. We're afraid of death.
Yeah. But
I think,
if we're gonna take this metaphor even a little further, I mean, the people closest to him probably don't see him the way that the rest of the world saw him. So to
yeah,
his family
yeah,
who were there, like they don't see him in the same way that everybody else sees him. They don't see death really when they see him. They see grandpa is still alive. Grandpa's still here. Grandpa's still able to be moved outside to enjoy the day on some level. And I think there's so much of that happens in churches whenever you are in the church. you oftentimes don't see the truth or the reality of the way that the situation is. What is alive and what is death. And because we're not listening, as you said, to what's being said and what's going on outside the church, we have absolutely no awareness of whether or not the quilting ministry is dead, dying, unhelpful, dragging down resources, or whether or not we need to start something else. And a lot of times we just don't want to know. And just again, to go back to the Jimmy Carter thing, for his family and for them, that was a huge moment. And they probably did not view that moment through the same lens that the outside world was viewing that moment. And sometimes I think that happens to the church as well. We are blinded by our involvement and our love and our connections within the church, and don't see that the perspective from the outside is just entirely different. We might be aghast at what we would hear if people were to speak truth.
Yeah, so good. So yeah, letting things die. And that's hard. That's really, as we head into the future, the churches that make it and survive will be the ones that learn how to spring new life in the church, look at things a little differently. The model of how you run and lead a church is probably going to have to look different as well.
And it needs to happen.
Yeah. I mean, you've been experimenting with this online church for a while, like, stuff like that, like really thinking outside the box. One of the conversations I'm having here, and I'm not afraid to share this out loud, is just like what, like having paying a full-time pastor, is
It's
not, I think, viable into the future.
It's becoming less and less sustainable for the new, I think the new era of ministry is going to be, but people were writing papers on this, Matt, right? You and I were in school with people who were writing papers on bivocational ministry, and this is the future. And I'm kind of laughing and saying, no, no way. Yeah. First of all, I don't think so. Second of all, I don't want this, but fast forward 10 years, or more. And it's like, yeah, I do think that the future of the church probably is, at least needfully, something that's more bivocational, where the pastor is not always necessarily full-time. It's just not sustainable for a lot of churches, and it may not be wise, and it may not even be healthy for the church or the pastor for it to be that way. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's not viable, just financial situations people find themselves in these days. So even if you have a church like ours with around 100 members, which probably 20 years ago easily pays for a full-time pastor, just for what people gave to the church, and they're just not doing that anymore. And it doesn't make them wrong or bad or evil. It's just the society we're in today. And then you have also too much pressure. And I think that's where you were headed with like the health part, is you put too much pressure on the bottom line and not doing the ministry God has called you to do, which can stunt actually what God wants to do through your church.
You end up serving the people who are giving and chase the money, whether you want to or not. You have to keep the doors open. And so
it's only natural.
But I think these are conversations that have to be had, because as we've been talking about reconstructing the church and thinking through the future, I think that in a lot of ways Europe is a great model for what we don't want to become here in the U.S. But I fear that we may be unable to avoid, and that's where most of the people consider themselves culturally a follower of Jesus, okay, whatever, but don't actually necessarily attend a local body, either an institutional church, or have any real connection with the Christian faith community. In Europe, a large part of that, there are obviously many things at play, but the church resisted change. We have our liturgy, we have our institutional systems and ways of doing things. We don't make quick changes or pivots. We're like the Titanic. We turn very slowly. Like, we measure those changes not in months and years, but in decades and centuries. And I think, because of that, we see in Europe not necessarily what we don't want here, but where we're headed. And I think that, the wise churches, the wise leaders will look ahead, will look down the road and say, we recognize that culture is changing. We recognize that we're no longer a place where people need to go to church to be viewed as being holy or healthy in our society. And so funding is changing, attendance patterns are changing. We can have arguments about whether or not it's right or wrong, biblically or theologically to do that, but the reality is the reality either way, and find other ways to do things and to solve problems: bivocational ministry, other sources of funding through, becoming a community center rather than a self center is a great idea. I think for a lot of communities and congregations who do have facilities that are sitting empty most of the time and can be utilized in other ways. Also, I think, one of the things that's seeing revival in Europe is a more practice based faith. A lot of the congregations that are growing and are seeing traction are those congregations in Europe who are involved in their communities, who are more plugged into the Spirit. And specifically, I mean more charismatic, more Pentecostal, because I think it's touching a place in people's souls and lives that just the traditional liturgy on its own isn't. It's resonating in new ways. And I think that, whether or not that's a more experiential, charismatic thing here in the US, or whether that's something that's more practical or active, I don't know. But I think that we definitely have to say what we have been doing in the American church, especially in the American evangelical church, is not working. It's not connecting with people anymore. The people that it is connecting to, that it is drawing, are people who are evangelicals from other churches who are just sheep shifting, to some other church. We're not seeing the converts rate that I think we should be seeing. And so churches who are, well, we're growing, well, yeah, but you're growing from other churches who are suffering attrition. There are very few people who are coming into Christianity who are outside of Christianity now. What do we have to do to reignite, I think, the flame of Christ within us? And then how does that show itself in the way we live in the world and the way we live and act in our worship?
That's so good. There was a lot there. Yeah, the liturgy has to be looked at. I think, does it allow people to connect with God? I mean, our old professor, Sweet, would always talk about like what was like the peak, the climax of the service. Where did people most connect? Where did the most energy happen? And if it's not around God, then you've kind of missed it. And he talked a lot about that. Like, people in our worship services need to experience God and His love and express their love and all of those things. And so, I think it goes both ways. A highly evangelical type service, it seems like the climax is either the offering or some band moment with a solo, or pithy statement from the preacher.
Yeah,
And it
sermon, altar
becomes
call.
about,
Yeah.
it becomes about the person, the people on the stage. Even that they call it a stage, it says a lot.
Comes
And
about the
then the
show.
flip side, yeah, the main line, it just seems like there's no life, right? A lot of churches, there's just nobody cares. There's no energy behind God and His love. It's just, we're just getting through this. We're just checking a box. And so that's kind of the extreme opposite of that. And so I
Yeah,
think
both of them are
that,
equally, though, frustrating
yeah,
and bad, I
yeah,
think.
yeah, I agree. I think there's a balance. There's got to be something in the middle. There's lots of different expressions out there of different types of liturgies. You mentioned some styles. And so, yeah, I think even, rethinking liturgy and what brings life to your community, the people God's called you to, and go from there. So,
Yeah, so you were talking about the liturgy and what we do and where the high watermark is. Lynn tells this story, which is, true, that, if you're talking going back to the Middle Ages, and so it was, and it still is in the Catholic Church, but I think in the Middle Ages there's a lot more fervor behind this. But it was the moment where, the bread was turned into the body of Christ, and the moment where, the cup, the wine, was turned into the blood of Christ. That moment where they hold it up, and transubstantiation, it changes. That's where the word hocus pocus come from. It's a framing, a rephrasing essentially of the words of institution in Latin for that moment where it changes. And Lynn tells the story. If you research this, it is true. People would pass out, in that moment, being overcome by the Spirit. And I think that, thinking through how we are perceived as churches in our communities, but also thinking through how our worship experiences, and everything's liturgy, whether it's mainline or an evangelical church, Pentecostal or Baptist, everybody has a liturgy. Everybody has a flow of worship. And where's the power in your flow of worship? And is it really, I think, in the place that it should be? I would suggest if it's in the sermon, it's probably not in the place that it should be. I would suggest if it's in just the music, it's probably not in the place that it should be. Perhaps there's a line or a verse or something in there that harkens and focuses on Christ and brings people to that point of change and reflection. But I think that it should be unequivocally Christ. It should be clearly Christ. And I think that there has to be probably a lot of reasoning given as to why it shouldn't be something to do with communion, frankly. No matter whether you're Protestant, evangelical, Catholic, charismatic, you would have to convince me fairly strongly with a lot of evidence that you have something that's more worthwhile in its service other than communion. That should be the climax. That should be the high water mark to me, frankly.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I mean, that's the whole I was going to say kind of the last point, but you segue right into it, is like taking and Len, this is a Len quote too, is like taking the anchors of our tradition and throwing them into the future. And so I think the key anchor of liturgy and throwing it in the future is the Eucharist, is communion. And that's why
a lot of us, even who do it every week, the Eucharist is still a throwaway moment. There's nothing really transformational about it. And so, I think even if you're, we do communion, we do the Eucharist every single week, it is it is the high water mark, but is it really?
Yeah.
Like, are you sure that for the people in the congregation, people who are coming, like, that is the moment? And if not, you may need to rethink what you're saying, where it's placed, how you're acting, how you're executing it, how you're inviting people into it and leading people out of it. I don't know.
No, I agree. I think there's things you can do to emphasize it more. I've seen churches, do different things. What we've done is we bring our kids back into the service right before communion at the end. So it makes it important that we value every person in the building being a part of that. I've seen other churches, they do like their traditional evangelical service, and the sermon's over. They do the greeting time after the sermon, and then they go into communion. So it's just kind of its own thing. That's kind of, they see as the most important.
That's the way the early church did it.
Yeah, exactly.
The early church did it at the end, and they kick you out before that moment in service. If you have not gone through catechism, if you are not been blessed, essentially, and been brought into the church and confirmed, then get out. We're closing the doors to do communion. But this importance that they gave, to that moment is the same importance that we see Paul, in 1 Corinthians, and the words that we use in institution. This is why Paul goes nuts, goes apeshit on the church at Corinth, because they were taking something that was so important, that was so central, and just abusing it. And so Paul goes nuts, and the early church would go nuts, and we just don't have that same kind of relationship with communion I think Paul, the early church, and Jesus did. And I think it's a bellwether for what's going on in the church that we don't have that, frankly.
Yeah, it's what Jesus gave us to remember him by, to gather around, to worship.
Do this,
around.
Right? He didn't say read the Bible. Do this and remember. Read your Bible and remembrance me. Go evangelize and remembrance of me. Do this thing. You're like, we'll do it once a quarter.
I was at a church once.
A little teeny cup and a chiclet-sized piece of bread.
Yeah, I did at a church once where we only did it when we thought it fit, and we literally went a year and we hadn't done it yet. And I said something. I was like, "You realize the last time we did this was like a year ago?" Everybody's like, "We should definitely do it." And
how much importance do we have? Shot glasses are larger than the cups that we use for communion.
It never fit. Communion never fit.
It says something about our theology, right? This is something about what we see as
Yeah.
being important. And I think the church is, in many ways, in the U.S. America where it is today, because of the things that we have centralized in the church. And, if you are one of those churches, one of those pastors, one of those individuals who are kind of thinking that's me in communion, I don't really see the importance. Maybe we're beginning to understand why the church is where it is, because we prioritize things that should not have been priority.
Yeah. Um,
Like voter guides.
that,
Anyway, whole other conversation, right?
uh, well, news. I mean, we could go on probably for another hour on all that stuff, but we'll leave it there for now. Maybe we'll pick it up again sometime. But so some crazy news. You mentioned the euthanasia, the death thing, which is a big thing that happened this week. Um, I find it hilarious that, and we've talked a lot about this, but just this constant flow from the fundamentalist Christian nationalists that like God's hand is upon Donald Trump, just blows my mind. I saw a tweet from somebody that was like during the uh, the debate the other night that God removed Pence so that we could have JD Vance, and I was just like, like, like talking like he's one of the apostles, which is just sad.
Yeah, I think we have to just recognize and admit that evangelicalism, especially here in America, has been co opted by empire, has been co opted by bad actors. And we just, in many ways, don't see the effects of it. It's worrisome how the state of religion is in the state now. Um, there is no separation of church and state because
Uh,
it is helpful to the state for there to be no separation.
yeah, and it comes from the top down. It was interesting. You retweeted Samuel Perry. Um, I saw this too, but that a lot of the fundamentalist pastors are more conservative and fundamentalist than even their congregations are,
Yeah,
um, which is pretty eye opening, to be honest with you. Because honestly, if Samuel Perry were to ask me what I thought before he released this, I would have said that the congregants are more,
yeah,
and that's why the pastors are, because they want to keep their jobs. But he says the opposite here, which to me is crazy.
yeah. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. I'm surprised as well. Um, but I think our pastors have been bought out. Their theology, they've. Yeah, I know.
uh,
I don't even want to. She who shall not be named, who wrote a book of trash.
and then
Harlequin
yeah,
romances have more. National Enquirer has more value as a
and then
legitimate.
I
Anyway, go
mean,
ahead.
yeah, and then this is just funny. Yesterday, you posted. It made me laugh. The fruits of evangelicalism and Trump. There's he Kevin screenshot tweeted this guy who's
Oh,
commenting, I assume, on one of your posts. He said, "There's not a stupider, gayer, and more evil wolf in sheep's clothing than Kevin M. Young. Repent, you retarded demon." Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's Christ-like. That's
yeah. There are a lot of amazing people out there, right? I mean, but
and
this is like right. This is the modern state of, you know. Yeah, I think I've got that. I can put it up here. There we go. Yeah, there's not a stupider gay. Whenever they start misspelling words intentionally so they don't get caught by the filters, you're probably writing something that shouldn't be written. Um, I just
yeah. Well, I'm assuming this person was anonymous, even though you blocked out their
Yes,
name.
they were anonymous, but there was, Christ and church stuff splashed all over,
But yeah, but I'm guessing this person's probably a clergy person.
Many
But
of them are, right? Hidden
yeah,
anonymous accounts are
yeah,
many of them are
yeah.
pastors.
And anyways, it's just sad, and I see a lot of that online these days, and we'll probably see more of it.
Probably Del
Um,
Partridge or Joel Webbins alt.
yeah, their burner account or Brian Save. Um,
He's so cute. Little Brian.
yeah. Well, these guys, if Trump does win, will be more emboldened than ever.
Yeah,
To say and do
the church
stuff.
is in a fight here in U.S. America for the heart and soul, frankly, of the gospel here. They will not prevail, even if they prevail in the short term, long term. My hope is not built on anything less, than Jesus' blood and righteousness. So that's just how it goes. Like I'm certain in the end it's all going to be okay. But really, there is a battle, not just for this nation, but frankly, just for the heart and soul of the gospel and the witness here in the United States. And for better or for worse, for a long time, the U.S. church has been a leading thinker for the church around the world. And however the church here in the U.S. goes has a lot of influence over the rest of the world, just as our politics has a lot of influence over the rest of the world. And a lot of church people have gotten eaten up by this cancer of toxic, false idolatry and theology that is best really kind of represented in Trump. The mentality, the lack of integrity, the false gospel that you can just name the name of Christ and yet live however the hell you want. The church, people who are true followers of the way, really need to begin to stand up and speak out against this, no matter the cost.
Yeah, it's time to stand up against that Jack theology for sure.
I like what you did there.
Yeah, saw that.
Yeah, I like that. Stand up against that Jack theology. That's good. I like what you did there.
I try to bring it in whenever we can.
I noticed. It's great.
All right, that's all I got. You got
All right.
anything?
No, let's kick it on to the after show. This is the part of the show where Matt and I pontificate on fitness for just a few minutes. I was gonna say it's also part of confession, right? It's
yeah, it's confession.
absolution. Hopefully, depends on how the week has been, right?
Yeah, my week last week went really well. Actually, I was at this retreat center, and so I was forced to eat, which could be a bad thing. I was forced to eat what they gave me, but they actually had very healthy and nutritious meals. I mostly not a lot of protein, so if I do it again, I'm going to bring my own protein.
Bring a
But
bag of protein.
yeah, I know that I did not. I know I lost weight, which was great.
Impressive.
And
Way to
I
go.
was able to run. I didn't lift or anything, but I did my running. I got a race coming up, so that actually was fine. And ran 3 miles for the first time in a while, so that felt good. So I feel like I could go do the race. But another month of training for that. Actually, a month from today is my race.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what it was. Okay, a month from today.
Yeah, November 3rd. Yeah, I got sick this week, so the last couple of days, the diet, I just been, eating whatever, although not a ton because I haven't felt great, but haven't been watching the old macros. So I started doing that again today. So yeah, not overall, it's been good. It's been good. I will say, felt good back at CrossFit today. Felt good. Bench day, which is always a good day to come back on.
It is a good day.
Uh,
Bench is best.
yeah, rowing and bench, so it was good. Yeah, I've actually felt really strong. I don't know, like we're doing this program, so every like Thursday we bench, and 2 Thursdays ago, I guess was the last time I did it, and I did the same way today just because I missed last week, and I was like, I could have gone up like 10 pounds or more, so it felt good to feel like I didn't lose anything. So yeah, I guess that's where I'm at. How about yourself?
Yeah, I am 4 weeks out now from the competition. I have been limping. I don't know if I told you this, but I've been like limping, and I finally went to the doctor, and I apparently have this tendonitis in my Achilles that may or may not require some surgery. The last word I got is it may not require major surgery, but I've been wearing this boot. I don't know
Oh,
if you can
it's a
see.
big boot.
Yeah, it's a
Big boot.
big boot there. Yeah. So I've been wearing the big boot, hoping. Which let me tell you, it makes squatting.
Yeah.
Everything with the legs. So when I get on
Yeah.
stage, who knows what the upper body will look like, but I can tell you that the lower body is going to it's going to look like chicken legs up there. Drumsticks. Yeah, so that's in 4 weeks. I am now in the major part of the cut where I'm literally just hungry all the time, eating almost nothing, like 30 grams of oatmeal, 30 grams of rice, a little bit of fish. I don't know if you've ever weighed 30 grams, but sometimes just go like weigh 30 grams. It's literally like a quarter cup of rice.
Oh no.
It's like so little food, but the body weight is like falling off. The body fat is falling off at this point. So the trade-off is, I guess acceptable. You're getting something out of it, but you're hangry all of the time. So I tried to just walk around with a smile, even though on the inside I'm like just this raging madman, because just always hungry. But yeah, I hit a weight this week that I don't think I've hit since high school.
Wow.
So yeah, here we go. And we'll see.
Well, it's working. Like, I mean, I can't see anything from your shoulder, chest area down, but you still look the same jacked. So I don't think you're losing a lot of muscle mass.
Yeah, that's the weird thing. Like, and people say this, but whenever you like really lose weight and lose body fat, especially when you're trying to intentionally trying to keep the muscle, like I've never been smaller, like muscular wise, I've never been this small since I started lifting. Like I'm tiny right now, like if you were to just like see me in person, but you look huge. It's like all smoke and mirrors. It's like I can't lift heavy and I'm super small, but you look big. So
Hey,
it is what it is. In
right.
pictures you look great, but in person, don't get in a fight with me. I'll lose. my 10th grade daughter could whip me, just any moment.
That's funny. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
So there you go. There's the update.
All right. Sounds good. See you guys next week.
All right. See you next week, man. Take care.